Welcome to the California Appellate Podcast, a discussion of timely trial tips and the latest cases and news coming from the California Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court. And now your hosts, Tim Kowal and Jeff Lewis.
Okay. All right. So we wrapped up with the legacy of the Chief Justice. Now let's talk about some nuts and bolts about how the new Chief Justice is going to be appointed, and perhaps more interestingly, how the new Chief Justice's old Associate Justice seat is going to be filled. So Governor Newsom has selected Justice Patricia Guerrero as the new Chief Justice, and to replace Guerrero, Governor Newsom has selected Judge Kelli Evans. But there's some uncertainty and speculation about whether the governor is nominating Evans for the seat or appointing her to the seat. And in fact, just before we started taping this episode on September 21st, 2022, David, you posted an article on At the Lectern stating that, quote, on November 10th, the 3-member Commission on Judicial Appointments will consider Governor Gavin Newsom's appointment of Judge Kelli Evans to the Supreme Court, end quote. And you note that because Evans was appointed and not nominated, she will not face the voters for 4 years. And I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit and explain what is the difference between appointment and nomination and why it matters.
Well, let me do why it matters first, because that's the easy. But in this situation, why it matters is that Justice Guerrero being nominated for the Chief Justice position means she's the nominated as a candidate for election at this November's election. So she will stand for election as Chief Justice in November. But the appointment, because it will not take effect until after the election, justices only stand for election at gubernatorial elections. So Judge Evans or Justice Evans, when she's confirmed, would not be on the ballot until 2026.
Now, David, you wrote a blog post at the Lectern urging that the governor should nominate Judge Evans now rather than appoint her later. And in that post, you said that the governor has opted for an appointment. You said, quote, I think he should nominate Judge Evans instead because that's what the state constitution mandates, end quote. And you also point out that under the state constitution, the governor before September 16th shall nominate a candidate. Do you have any information about what the governor's office makes of this constitutional provision and why it opted for the route it chose?
Well, the governor's office definitely does not agree with my position. I thought that, and I think that the governor had the constitutional obligation to nominate a candidate for Guerrero's seat, so that candidate, Judge Evans, who would have been, would stand for election this November. And the governor's office, after that post was published, I got a call from the governor's office where they were, not happy with that post, I guess, and the governor's office was explaining what their position is. And then, I certainly understand their position. It's certainly not frivolous, and I don't think there's anything nefarious about their position. I just happen to disagree with it.
Is that something that the governor's office is hoping that you'll relate at the lectern to your readers?
Well, I think in that post, very long post, I think I explained what the governor's position was as to why a nomination wasn't necessary and why an appointment was the right way to go, which is the way he is going with Judge Evans.
Right. Now, this story about this mini drama over a nomination or appointment ensuing from the Chief Justice's announcement of her retirement in an election year. It reminded me of an anecdote about in 1968 when the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Earl Warren, announced his retirement. 1968 was a presidential election year, and a debacle ensued after President Lyndon Johnson announced that Abe Fortas would replace Warren. And Fortas thereafter wound up lying to the Judiciary Committee about not having given policy advice to LBJ. That led to LBJ ordering his staff to destroy all the Fortas papers. And all this led to the first and only SCOTUS nominee blocked by filibuster. And it also led to a norm that a justice, a prudent justice, should not retire during a presidential election year. And obviously, I'm not drawing a comparison. We don't have anything like such a scandal here, but I wonder if these nice legal questions that we've been talking about, nomination versus appointment, maybe they wouldn't have occurred if the Chief Justice did not retire or announce her retirement in an election year. You think there would be some value in a norm that justices shouldn't retire in an election year?
Well, I mean, under the Constitution, Supreme Court justices' terms necessarily end in a gubernatorial election year. So, unless they retire or resign before their term is ending, then you're going to have that situation like we have this year, where a justice retires just before an election, a gubernatorial election.
Now, yeah, that is a big difference. The federal bench obviously does not have retention elections like we do here in California for judges. But an 11-year term is a long term, and certainly if our Chief Justice had run for another retention election, she could have retired sometime into her term, could she not have?
Yeah, she certainly could have. It's a 12-year term, by the way, not just 11, yes. So even longer term. But yeah, all the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court justices have 12-year terms. But yeah, she could have retired before her term expired. That's the way it more often happens. Justice Cuellar, Justice Chin, Justice Werdegar, I believe they all retired before their terms were up. Chief Justice George let his term expire. So that's the way he retired, just the way that the current chief is retiring. So it can go either way.
You have just listened to the California Appellate Podcast, a discussion of timely trial tips and the latest cases and news coming from the California Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court. For more information about the cases discussed in today's episode, our hosts, and other episodes, visit the California Appellate Law Podcast website at calpodcast.com. That's calpodcast.com. Thanks to Jonathan Caro for our intro music. Thank you for listening, and please join us again.